First, we'd like to thank the FH Foundation for inviting us here to share our story. We're thrilled to be here learning from all of you about the new opportunities on the horizon to help those of us living with FH. We are still relatively new to our journey with FH, despite the fact that we knew several of our family members had high cholesterol for much of their lives. It wasn't until 2 years ago that all the dots were connected for us, and we found out that we were, in fact, an entire family living with FH. My husband Dave and I have 3 children. Cameron is 7, Colin is 5, and Molly is 2. Our journey with FH began when we noticed small bumps on Cameron's elbows and knees. He was 4 years old. When we brought them to the attention of Cameron's pediatrician at the time, she told us it was skin molluscum and just to keep an eye on it. Well, over months, the bumps continued to get larger and more pronounced in size. We eventually took him to a dermatologist to get a second opinion. And unfortunately, at the time, Cameron had too much anxiety for the dermatologist to get a biopsy of those bumps. Again, over a few months, we watched the bumps grow in size, and they multiplied. We took him back to the same dermatologist where a biopsy was in fact completed, and we left. I got a call the very next day, and the dermatologist told me to sit down, and she had some devastating news. She told me those small bumps that we thought were skin molluscum were in fact cholesterol-xanthomas. This was completely new to me. We had never heard anything about cholesterol-xanthomas before, and clearly neither had Cameron's pediatrician at the time, because we were told it was skin molluscum. Well, this unfortunately was not the case. More education about cholesterol-xanthomas and the warning signs could have helped us treat Cameron at an earlier age. Luckily, we saw Dr. Sarah DiFerrante at Boston Children's Hospital shortly thereafter about finding about the xanthomas. When we first got Cameron's cholesterol tested in November 2017, his LDL at the age of 5 was 897. Cameron was immediately started on atorvastatin, ezetimibe, and baby aspirin. Around the same time, Cameron had a coronary CT scan completed, and we found out that he already had a 90% blockage in his right coronary artery. He was 5. This absolutely devastating news shattered our world. There was so much unknown swirling around our heads, and we felt completely overwhelmed. Never in a million years could we have felt that this little active boy who ran more than he walked could have such advanced heart disease. The guilt we felt as parents was crushing. How did we not know that this little boy had been living with FH for the first years of his life, and we had no idea? Cameron had a port placed in his chest in the beginning of 2018, and he started his first LDL apheresis treatment shortly thereafter. He has gone every single week, and as of today, has received 87 treatments at the age of 7 years old. This was a lot for such a young boy to process. He was only 5 at the time that he started spending 7 hours every Tuesday at the hospital. Prior to his first treatment, medication only brought his LDL down to a level of 560, so we had no option. This was necessary. When Cameron first started his treatments, he suffered from extreme anxiety on the days that he would have to go to the hospital. We were forced to engage the behavioral response team at Boston Children's Hospital because when Cameron saw the hospital, he would refuse to get out of the car. They would have to meet me when I arrived and physically had to help me remove him from the car. The fear in this little boy's eyes was heartbreaking. We also had to engage a counselor to do some bedside counseling with Cameron at the start of his treatments. However, after several months of this new routine, his strength and courage persevered, and he no longer needed any assistance from the behavioral response team nor the therapist. His nickname around the apheresis unit became Champ, and he certainly is our champion. Now, unfortunately, go Patriots. Now, unfortunately, Cameron is not our only child living with FH. At the time that Cameron was diagnosed, we also got our other 2 children tested. Colin, who was 3 at the time, had an LDL level of 190, and our daughter Molly, who was 6 months at the time, had an LDL level of 704. As such, Colin was determined to be HeFH, and Molly was determined to be HoFH. Colin is not currently on any medication, and we will continue to watch his numbers over time until we determine when it's appropriate to start treatment. Molly has been on a combination of statins and ezetimibe since she was diagnosed, and we are waiting to see how this can control the plaque buildup over time. Her last cardiac catheterizations showed that there was no atherosclerosis, and we will do another one in the spring to follow up. However, in addition to HoFH, our daughter Molly also has a neurological condition called microcephaly and global developmental delays. As such, due to her cognitive disabilities, it is very unlikely that Molly will be able to do LDL apheresis each week as Cameron does. As such, it is very important that we use our voice to advocate for better treatment options for those patients, such as Molly, that cannot do LDL apheresis if medication won't work. If the medication cannot get Molly's LDL under control, we will likely have to do a liver transplant to save her life. These are no words that any parent should ever have to utter to save a life. I will continue to use my voice to advocate for more funding, more clinical trials, more research, so that no parent should ever have to worry about FH ever taking a child again. As the dust settled and we became more educated on the severity of FH, the fear and anxiety for us and our future crept back in. That is when we turned to the FH Foundation. Not only did the FH Foundation serve as our primary resource for information, but it also gave us a sense of community and let us know that we were not alone. Kat and Catherine both gave us such great peace of mind that despite this grim diagnosis, we could live with FH. With the proper medication and the proper care management team, we could do this, and we would do it together. Through the FH Foundation's Facebook page, we were able to connect with other families with young children living a very similar journey to ours. We received invaluable information as to what worked for those families, and it helped us. It gave us the hope that with enough of us out there, we can have a voice to advocate for change and strive for more treatment options for these young children. Now, for the past few minutes, I've spoken about our children living with FH. However, as we all know, when a child has HoFH, the parent also has FH. It sometimes feels like there are not enough hours in the day to cater to both parents' and children's needs. And that's why Dave and I had to take the back seat to focus on our children. Yet once we learned about the severity of this disease, we knew we had to stay on top of it ourselves. Our children needed us. Dave's journey began 18 years ago when he found out he had high cholesterol at the age of 20. His LDL at the time was 400, but no one diagnosed him with FH, and no one explained that he had a genetic disease that he could pass on to his children. He was put on statins and stayed on statins until the age of 31 with no issues. At the age of 31, he was training for a road race and experienced severe muscle cramping. His cardiologist at the time told him he was probably statin intolerant and took him off the statins. He then started on a PCSK9 inhibitor at the age of 33 after his lipid testing resulted in an LDL of over 500. During 2017 and 2018, Dave started to experience severe chest pains. Despite his high history of cholesterol, the fact that he was on a PCSK9 inhibitor, and his children's recent diagnosis of HoFH, his cardiologist at the time said it was probably heartburn and prescribed Prilosec. Yes, Prilosec. Dave went back to the same cardiologist 2 more times over several months to address the severe chest pain, and they had him do a stress test and said everything was fine. Finally, after experiencing chest pains for over a year with absolutely no answers, Dave went into the hospital for an angiogram. As I said, parents often don't take care of themselves. It took me pushing him, with lots of nagging, to demand this test from his cardiologist. We are extremely lucky he did, because at the time that he went in for his angiogram, they found that he had 2 blocked arteries, one at 80% and the other at 85%, and he had 2 stents placed that morning. Needless to say, that cardiologist is no longer Dave's doctor. We are very lucky and thankful to those of you in this room that have come up with better treatment options, such as the PCSK9 inhibitor, and that is why my husband is alive today. So we are extremely grateful to all of you in this room that has helped that. Luckily for us, Dave is feeling healthy and his numbers continue to look good. His new cardiologist has supplemented his PCSK9 inhibitor with ezetimibe and 10 milligrams of atorvastatin, and that has brought his LDL down to a range of 50 to 90. We have realized that in order to stay ahead of FH, you have to have the right care management team in place and have a doctor that truly understands how FH works. Sadly, there are a lot of stories out there, very similar to ours, where individuals did not receive the proper education or treatment because the medical team just did not know how FH worked. That is why we are so grateful to the FH Foundation in doing all it does for spreading awareness and education, and grateful to all of you in this room for the incredible work you do as medical experts, policy leaders, and industry leaders. Your improvements in the field are why we are here today. In addition to spreading awareness and education, we found firsthand that the FH Foundation also provides hope to individuals living with FH. After Dave had his stents placed, he didn't know what that meant for his future. A few months after he had those stents placed, we attended the HOFH Community Forum in Boston, Massachusetts. We were able to meet many other families like our own and hear from leading FH experts. It was life-changing for us and gave us such inspiration to hear from others who had been living with FH, experienced cardiac events, and yet were still here today living a healthy lifestyle. It gave hope. It gave us inspiration to get more involved and to use our time wisely so that we could help advocate for change and to make sure that all of us continue to live a healthy lifestyle. As for me, I am currently awaiting my genetic testing to determine how aggressive they want to treat my LDL. My untreated LDL is 136. Although this is not as high as my children's, I do understand that because I carry the FH gene, I'm still at a much greater risk of a heart attack than someone without FH. I recently switched over to a new primary care physician and a new cardiologist who have a great awareness and understanding of FH. And I feel very confident that I too can live with FH in a healthy lifestyle because we have the right team in place. The bottom line is FH cannot wait. We need more awareness, we need more understanding, and we need more action on behalf of the medical community. Policymakers and those of us living with FH can make a difference, and we have to find every individual living with FH who is undiagnosed so that we can find them and treat them early enough before it's too late. We truly believe that had we known of our own FH diagnosis and gotten Cameron tested at the time that he was born, he would not have such advanced heart disease today. We are grateful for the treatments that are available, but we need to treat people with FH sooner so that dads like Dave can be here for their children. And we need better treatment options for all of these children living with HoFH so that they can enjoy their childhoods as they deserve to, running around instead of inside the four walls of a hospital each week. Just last week, Cameron had a tough day and began to cry on our drive home from the hospital. I stared at his tear-soaked eyes in the rearview mirror of the car, and I asked him what was wrong. And he said, "I just don't want to do this anymore." I promised him that we would do everything possible to find better options for him and for with all people living with FH. So please, may we all use our strength together to fight this fight and make a difference for this entire community. Thank you.
Thank you for being so brave. Will you start? Well, I also don't know where to start, but we can, what I wanted to ask you was, you're a very convincing person in this room. When you are at the school, with your friends, maybe with your aunts or your cousins, how do you talk to them about this? Because we need to convince the world. We need to convince the world in Washington, D.C., but we also need to convince the world locally. So how do you, what's the response? What's the message? Any success?
I think for us, one of the big hurdles that we've had to get over is speaking to people outside of this room that don't understand FH, such as the schools, our children's friends, parents, our family members, to explain that your child has a severe cholesterol disorder does not resonate with people. It resonates with us because we understand what that means. But we have found to explain the heart disease impact of this, there is more understanding of that, and the impact of saying my child has a 90% blockage in his heart is both scary to say, but it's real. And we need to explain this to people. It's been very difficult for us, I think, to explain the severity of the disease when people just truly don't know about it. As we have continued on this journey, we have been empowered by sharing this story. The story that you heard today is something that I'm very open sharing with people because I think it will help other families. And despite it being hard to talk about, I think of our children and I think about us. And I think it's important that if we can impact one family, one parent that has high cholesterol, that has not thought to get their child tested, well, that's our service. That's what we're doing in honor of our children. So that's how we've looked at our journey, and we found purpose in it. There are good days and there are bad days. Similar to the experience I just explained, there's a lot of tears sometimes in the house. But at the same time, we know that we were given these cards and we're going to make a difference with it.
So how has the rest of your family responded to this since, in FH, the family is the outbreak?
Yeah. The extended family or
Yes.
Do you want to?
Okay.
No?
I'm the more emotional one in the family. Not a chance I could have done what she just did.
My tears will come later. We are extremely lucky to have the family that we do. We have been picked up a number of times, and the strength around us that our parents, our siblings, our children, our nieces, our extended family, our aunts, uncles, cousins, we have an enormous support system that I think when you do have a rare disease, you need. You can't fight this fight alone. You need to have the strength and support. In addition to our family, our friends have been amazing. So we could not be luckier to be put in this position and have the family and friends that we do supporting us day in and day out. Oh, we just recently, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law both turned 40. And I think they're watching on the Facebook Live. So hi, guys. Birthday. And they were kind enough that in lieu of having a traditional over-the-hill 40th birthday party, they thought, let's do some good. And with their group of friends and with some of our friends and family, they had a fundraiser for the FH Foundation. And not only was it important for the money that they raised for the FH Foundation, but the amount of people that we reached with the message of the foundation and awareness of FH left me empowered that we really did reach a number of people. In addition to their fundraiser, bringing in, I think it was close to $54,000 for the FH Foundation that night. So it was a wonderful turnout. We had a great amount of people that have learned about FH, and I hope they go home and they talk to their families about it. So that's what's really important, is spreading the message and reaching more people and finding those that are undiagnosed.
Did your brother go and get tested? I mean, they were so magnanimous of spirit. I know the team just absolutely loved working with them. And honestly, you're one of the second families who've ever stepped up to really reach your network to say, it's actually not a rare condition. HoFH is, but HeFH is so common that there are others that you know more than 250 people who also have it. But I wonder, because what we see with homozygous FH is it is so devastating that
oftentimes families forget
Yeah.
that there's an entire set of individuals connected to those HoFH young adults or children who also need to be screened and be getting their care. Just like when we all met in Boston and
Yeah.
talked, I wondered if you've seen your family think about their own status in terms of familial hypercholesterolemia.
Yeah, I'd say everybody really has. My brother they tested all of his 2 kids, plus he and his wife. And then my folks have been tested, and the same going on her side. So they're getting much more engaged, and there's another test going on. It's through One Brave Idea, and so that's part of a diagnosis process, trying to get early indicators to see what is HeFH, what is HoFH. And so I did that, and my brother's doing it, as are my folks. So everybody's really getting behind the cause so that we can continue to raise that awareness.
So Sarah, do you caring for the kids? I'm curious how much time you can spend encouraging parents to also take care of themselves. Because I know that, I just see it as a continual issue with families who have children with homozygous FH.
Well, we definitely see it in families with HoFH, same phenomenon you discussed, where the parents are so involved in caring for their children, they, as we all do, kind of forget about their own. And we have other families exactly like that in our care group. So that's certainly a common phenomenon. People forget to take their medicines, or they drop out in and out of care.
I'd like to give Dr. DeFronte a lot of credit, because when Cameron was diagnosed, she spent the time to really talk to us about the family as a whole. As you said, it's a family that lives with FH. And it's because of Dr. DeFronte that Dave switched cardiologists and is in great hands with the cardiologist he's seeing now, but it was at your encouragement that he do that. So thank you.
Well, I think when we have even someone with HeFH, even heterozygous FH, we are always cognizant of who's in the room, and the person at the greatest risk in the room in that situation is the parent, because they're older. So we're hoping that keep that going, that message.
Does anyone from the audience, would you mind if anyone has questions? We have at least one microphone here. I think there's one towards the back too, if anyone would like to ask a question of the Robinsons.
And while people are thinking of those, this is a tough one, but if you were able to talk to your original pediatrician, what could you say besides, what could you say?
We've played out that conversation a number of times.
We wrote it down once, too.
Not the first thing, but maybe the second thing.
I think we've thought long and hard about, how do we help? And we have thought about perhaps writing a letter, not with any negative tone, but to say, this was the warning sign that we could have found. Those xanthomas were there for almost a year. That was a year of not getting the proper treatment, the year of not knowing that he had FH. So I think, to go back in time, I think it's crucial. And I know Dr. Knowles spoke about that on his slide, that pediatricians get more educated about the warning signs of FH, what to look for. Just recently, I took my son Colin in for his 5-year checkup, and Colin is our son with HeFH, and on the 5-year fact sheet that a doctor gives, right there in a box on the corner said, if either of the child's parents have high cholesterol, please talk to your pediatrician about it, and we encourage your child to get tested. That to me, I'm sorry I keep touching that, that to me made a huge difference. that he was taking the time to revise policy procedures and encourage people to have that conversation with the pediatrician. We feel very confident in the practice we're at. Our pediatrician actually shut down the office during lunch once, and we found out that he hosted a lunch and learn about xanthomas for the nurses, for other doctors in the practice, to know that these patients came into our practice and it was missed, and these are the things that we need to look out for. And that's exactly what we want. We want these doctors to have more education and awareness. So going back to your original question, I think that's really the main goal, if we could have a conversation, is to help those patients that do present with these symptoms and warning signs, to make sure that they're getting tested so that they can get the treatment sooner. We know early detection and early treatment is prevention. So.
But after we wrote everything down that we were gonna say, we realized it was probably better to take that approach. It might be a little more productive. And we have talked to my prior cardiologist just to talk to her about, my first thing with Prilosec wasn't really cutting the pain. So I then asked, are there any other drugs or medications I should take outside of the PCSK9? And she said no. And so the first thing my new cardiologist did, Dr. Plutsky, that Dr. DiFerrante introduced me to, is put me on Zetia as well as atorvastatin, and that's gotten me down. So I'm trying to tell that story, not just around the office, but also around the community too, because it can help save other lives.
Okay, well, I think that, we have one question.
Thank you, Mrs. Robinson, for sharing your story. It was very powerful. Dr. Knowles had talked about oftentimes the difficulties of insurance covering either genetic testing or the medications. And I'm wondering if you ran into any of those obstacles in your journey.
Yes, I'm actually in the insurance business, so don't throw anything up here. But given that I'm in that business, I do know how to navigate the system, but ran into equal trouble. I'd been declined from Repatha multiple times. We had to reissue appeals and really didn't work, and that slowed down a lot of my progress with keeping my LDL down. In addition to that, it's been the change of insurance companies. As we move our health insurance from one carrier to another, they may have different appetites for which drug they're going to recommend. And then I had that same issue again where I was on Repatha, then to Praluent, then to Repatha again. So no matter how much our health insurance goes up, I'm not changing again because it's such an arduous process. It has been very helpful with the FH Foundation. You do take a look at that guide because it does make a difference and you can give it to the doctor's office. But we've had less issues with our children in that regard. It's been more the issues I've faced.
So that was excellent. It's great to hear y'all's perspective. I'm a pediatric cardiologist in a very small little area between two big institutions by about 8 hours in each direction. So I'm kind of by myself. So one of the biggest things we're talking about is education of our primary care providers and all our providers to get them aware of this condition and that it is so common. But one of the other issues that I see is fear. Fear on the behalf of the provider, fear on the behalf of the family. Because there is this fear that if we start screening everybody's going to be on statin. They're all going to be medicated. And that's a big hurdle to overcome because we're not starting everybody on statins. We're not finding this in every single person. It's starting the right person on the right medication at the right time. So I'm interested, when you found out that your children were going to have to be on statins, how did you deal with that? How did you feel about that? Were you afraid about that medication? Had that medication gotten some fear in you, or had somebody made you afraid of starting it? And then the second part of the question is, what's the nicknames for your other kids other than Champ?
First, the easy part of that answer is Cameron, Colin, and Molly. We won't say exactly the nicknames we use for them around the house, but we love them all. To your question on was there fear, there was fear with the diagnosis. Fear about putting them on statins, no. And the reason was we were in wonderful hands with Dr. DiFerrante. being educated on if you don't go on statins, this is what can happen. So I think to fight that fear, there's enough facts out there to show that statins need to be there for people with FH or some LDL lowering treatment option. And it's absolutely crucial that no matter the age, that the children are treated early enough. I mean, our daughter Molly was 6 months old when we started putting her on atorvastatin and ezetimibe. There was no question in our mind that that's what we had to do. I mean, her cholesterol was 704, and unfortunately, it's still around the 600s or high fives right now with the medication that she's on. So I don't think, unless Dave would think other, we had no fear because we knew it needed to save the lives of our children.
Yeah, I didn't have, just because it was familiar to us since I had been on them, but it was I think the fear, if there is one, is that the muscle enzyme reading caused the pain, is what I was told, but then I further learned it really wasn't necessarily from the statin. It was because I was working out and maybe gained a little weight, and it was heavier on my legs to carry that around. So it was more just understanding the impact of the medicine and the side effects. Since we had that unfortunate ability to learn on that topic, we were more comfortable with our children because we knew they needed something.
I think that solidified that for y'all, you had so much education on it that you really felt comfortable with it. And that's where we need to get our providers to. They need to be comfortable that they have the education that this is something that's common, that we need to be adjudicating the fear of not everybody has this, not everybody is going on a statin. It is worth screening this. It is worth looking for it.
So I can just say a couple words on this because I encounter this in families, mostly where there's heterozygous FH and parents are nervous, and also speaking with pediatricians. And I try to reframe the topic so that we're clearly distinguishing the difference between a genetic and a secondary lipid disorder. And I think we were talking about this a little bit. We might have done ourselves a disservice by talking about cholesterol screening as a broad general category, because pediatricians we're really comfortable with screening for genetic disorders. We do the heel stick. We do all sorts of, we're kind of into that. We're geeky. We like these like weird small things, and 1 in 250 is actually like quite common, and a pediatrician will understand that. So if we could talk about screening for FH, if we can use that language in a much more intentional way, and then I take it a step further and I say if I told you that you had a genetic disease like cystic fibrosis or like Down syndrome, I mean different type of genetic disease, and there was a drug that you could take every day that had very low side effects, risks, and would nearly reverse it, I mean, wouldn't that be great? So that's the kind of framing we have to do with pediatricians. We can find a genetic disorder and we can treat it with a medicine that's really quite safe. And so so we need to work harder in education with our colleagues.
Very much agree.
Absolutely. So thank you all. We're so honored that you're part of our greater community. I think you'll find, talking with all of these experts here, you'll learn even more and find solace in what there is that can be done for everyone in your family.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.